Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep, into something pretty fundamental to, well, just being human. Depression.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we've got kind of a huge spread of sources for this one.
Yeah, we've got everything from like the clinical side, how it's understood from a, medical perspective,
Right.
to how it's tackled in therapy, like different approaches,
Hmm.
to, some really personal stories, even
Yeah.
some historical perspectives, which is always fascinating.
Exactly. Trying to get the full picture here.
Right. So our mission for you today is to really kind of pull out the core, the key insights into how depression unfolds, the different routes people take to treatment, and the big one, I think, the role of loss and attachment.
Absolutely. Those are really key themes that weave through a lot of what we're going to be looking at.
Exactly. And we want to do this without, drowning you in information.
Right. It's about making sense of it all, connecting the dots.
So let's jump right in. The first thing our sources really highlight is that understanding how depression typically progresses its course is so crucial.
And it makes sense. It's not just about identifying depression. It's about making good decisions around treatment, like
Okay.
when to start, how long it might be needed,
Yeah.
anticipating what kind of support someone might need.
Right, right. And our sources were really clear about the impact of depression,
Yeah.
saying that it's morbidity, how serious it
Yeah.
is comparable to or even sometimes greater than many chronic physical illnesses.
And that really drives home the point that this is not something to minimize or just, brush aside.
Yeah,
It can have a profound effect on someone's overall health and well-being.
absolutely. And it seems like, our grasp of how this progression happens has, well, really changed over time
Oh, yeah.
before the findings of the CDS.
The collaborative depression study, yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of variation in what the early studies were suggesting.
Right.
Some said depression usually was a one-time thing, a single episode, while others said it was likely to happen again multiple times.
And looking back, you can kind of see why there were these discrepancies. Studying something as complex as depression, it's just inherently difficult.
Right, right.
The methods varied. Some focused on people who were hospitalized, others on those living in the community. And, back then, there wasn't always a consistent way of defining depression itself. So piecing together a clear picture of how it usually unfolded was challenging.
And that's where the CDS findings really made a difference, right?
Absolutely. It challenged that earlier idea that people with unipolar depression, meaning they only experience depressive episodes, would typically have a full recovery.
Right. So complete recovery was not the rule, like some previously thought.
Exactly. And their initial results showed this whole spectrum of how people recovered. And importantly, that many who were considered recovered still had some symptoms hanging around. So it really made everyone rethink what recovery actually meant in the context of depression. It wasn't always a complete return to how things were before the illness.
Right, right. Like there could be these subtle lingering effects.
Exactly. And again, going back to those earlier studies, the types of people they included, some with just depression, others with other health problems, that explain some of the discrepancies in their findings.
Makes sense. Now, switching gears a bit, the ClinFall study, that really brought to light how interconnected major depression and substance use disorders can be.
Yeah, it's a complex relationship.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a simple case of one leading to the other. It was more dynamic.
Right. Like, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that the way major depression unfolded over time, its trajectory, could actually predict how someone's substance dependence would go. And even more surprising, some cases initially diagnosed as depression caused by substance use were later recategorized as major depressive disorder, independent of the substance use.
So it's not always straightforward. What might look like substance abuse could actually have a depressive component underneath.
Precisely. And it highlights the challenges of diagnosing these conditions accurately. It's not always black and white.
Okay, so understanding how those two things are connected is really important. Now let's talk about family history and treatment. The CDS data also looked at that. It found that having a family history of bipolar disorder didn't seem to affect how someone responded to lithium for depression. But if there was a family history of only major depression, those folks tended to have more symptoms while taking lithium.
So while there might be some shared vulnerabilities within families for mood disorders in general, the specific factors, whether genetic or biological, involved in unipolar versus bipolar depression, might influence how someone responds to a particular medication. It's a nuance, but an important one.
Okay, makes sense. And what about psychotic features, like hallucinations or delusions during a depressive episode? Did our sources say anything about that?
Yeah, they mentioned that if someone has those features during a depressive episode, it could actually predict how things might go in the long term, specifically how much time they might spend in future depressive or manic episodes.
Really? So having those psychotic features during a depressive episode is kind of a red flag.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
It suggests a greater likelihood of experiencing those kinds of symptoms again in future episodes, whether those episodes are primarily depressive or manic. But here's an interesting twist. It wasn't necessarily the same for manic episodes.
Oh, so having psychotic features during mania didn't predict that psychosis would stick around.
Exactly. It's a subtle but important distinction.
Wow, okay. We also saw that what starts as unipolar depression, so just depressive episodes, could potentially shift into bipolar disorder later on.
Right. And it seems that experiencing subthreshold hypomanic symptoms, like milder versions of the elevated mood and energy seen in full-blown mania, might be an early indicator of that shift.
So it's like a warning sign.
You could think of it that way. It suggests that for some people, the diagnostic picture might not be static. It can change over time. And recognizing these subtle changes, even if they don't meet the full criteria for hypomania, could be really valuable in identifying who might be on that path toward bipolar disorder.
That makes sense. It's about picking up on those early cues. And finally, our sources referenced the NCSR, which looked at how major depression might differ across different age groups.
Right, reminding us that depression doesn't look the same in everyone. It can be shaped by where someone is in their life.
Okay, so we've covered how depression progresses. Now
Yeah.
let's talk about different ways it's tackled in therapy. We came across acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. They described it as a second-order contextualistic approach.
Yeah, that sounds a bit technical.
It does. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. What's key is that ACT doesn't primarily focus on changing the specific content of your thoughts or feelings.
No.
Like, it's not about forcing yourself to think positive when you're feeling down.
Okay.
It's more about shifting your relationship to those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah.
The core idea is to weaken the grip that difficult inner experiences like sadness or negative self-talk have on your actions. So instead of getting tangled up in trying to eliminate those feelings, ACT helps you to recognize them, accept that they're there, and still move forward in a way that aligns with what truly matters to you.
So it's not about saying, I shouldn't think I'm not good enough. It's more about noticing that thought, acknowledging it, but not letting it stop you from pursuing things you value.
Exactly. It questions the usefulness of getting caught up in a struggle to change or get rid of those internal experiences. Instead, it zeroes in on two fundamental questions when working with someone experiencing depression. What needs to be accepted, and what are the core values that can guide committed action in their life?
Okay. So two people might both need to accept feelings of self-doubt, but what really motivates them, their values, could be totally different.
Precisely. And the reverse is also true. Two people with very similar values might be struggling with different types of what ACT calls fused material. Maybe one person is stuck replaying past mistakes, while the other is constantly avoiding feelings of inadequacy. So the acceptance work in therapy would be tailored to those specific barriers.
I see. And our source on ACT also emphasized setting clear, achievable goals in therapy that are directly tied to those values. Like, being nicer is too vague, but asking 4 people about their well-being each day is much more concrete.
That's a crucial part of it. Translating those abstract values into actions. Vague goals are hard to track, don't give you a sense of progress. Well-defined goals, especially ones that resonate with what truly matters to the person, give a sense of direction and fuel that commitment to actually do something.
It's about taking those big, maybe sometimes overwhelming values and breaking them down into bite-sized pieces.
Exactly. And mindfulness exercises, like focusing on your breath, seem to be a big part of ACT too. It's not just about doing them now and then, it's about making them a regular practice, even tracking your progress.
Right. It's like building a muscle.
Exactly. Mindfulness in ACT is about cultivating this present moment awareness, developing what they call self as context. It's basically a perspective from which you can observe your thoughts and feelings without automatically reacting to them. And regular practice helps you build that capacity. It creates more space between what's going on inside and your actions, giving you more choice in how you respond.
Okay. Now let's compare that to cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. Our sources described it as an approach that looks at how our thoughts and attitudes affect our behavior and how our behavior can, in turn, affect our thoughts.
Right. And the aim is to identify and promote healthier thinking patterns and behaviors to address whatever psychological imbalances are happening. So in a way, it's more directly focused on changing those unhelpful thoughts and behaviors.
Okay. So if ACT is about accepting and living with those thoughts and feelings, CBT is about changing them.
In a way, yes. The focus in CBT is often on achieving specific, measurable improvements related to the person's specific difficulties.
I see. And it seems a big part of CBT is helping people become aware of those automatic negative thoughts, the ones that just pop up, often rooted in early experiences.
Precisely. CBT helps individuals learn to catch those thoughts as they arise, evaluate how realistic or helpful they are, and then challenge and replace them with more balanced and constructive ways of thinking.
It's like becoming a detective of your own mind.
In a way, yes. You're learning to identify those patterns and then disrupt them. And it also incorporates behavioral techniques to encourage positive changes in activity levels and develop better coping skills.
That makes sense. It's a very active approach. And one of our sources mentioned the collaborative depression study again, saying that cognitive therapy was actually quite effective compared to medication in some cases. And it even mentioned the potential for bibliotherapy, using self-help books like Feeling Good to bring about quick improvement for some people.
Yeah, that's interesting. It highlights the potential value of well-structured self-help resources, especially those based on CBT principles. They can be a really powerful tool for some people, even leading to rapid positive changes. But of course, it's important to remember that for more severe or complex situations, working with a mental health professional is often crucial.
Right, right. It's about finding the right level of support. Okay, let's move into a sensitive area. Depression and loss, particularly bereavement. Our sources talked about rumination, that kind of dwelling on negative thoughts, as a really unhelpful way of thinking when grieving.
Yeah, and it makes sense when you think about it. That kind of repetitive, passive focus on negative feelings can really prolong the experience of sadness and make it much harder to cope with the tasks of mourning and adjusting to life after a loss.
It's like getting stuck in a loop.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that it almost seems counterintuitive. You'd think focusing on the loss would help you process it, find meaning in it. But research suggests that it might actually make finding meaning more difficult.
So it's the opposite of what you'd expect.
In a way, yes. It's like a mental trap. You're trying to make sense of it, but the way you're going about it keeps you stuck in the pain. And our sources also pointed out some potential consequences of that rumination. Things like avoiding problems that need attention and even pushing away people who are trying to support you.
Yeah, unintentionally isolating yourself when you need connection the most.
Exactly. And thankfully, there are ways to help people who are caught in that cycle of rumination. Things like helping them develop better problem-solving skills, encouraging them to reconnect with their social network, and finding healthy ways to maintain a connection with the person they lost without solely focusing on the pain. It's about shifting from that passive dwelling to more active coping.
Right, finding ways to honor the person while still moving forward. Our sources also highlighted the unique experience of parents grieving the loss of a child. Both parents grieve deeply, even though fathers might sometimes express their grief more privately, maybe because of societal expectations around strength.
Absolutely. Grief is a universal human experience, but how it's expressed can be hugely influenced by cultural norms, especially around gender. It's so important to recognize that a father's internal experience of grief is likely very real, even if it's not shown outwardly in the same way.
It's about recognizing those different ways of coping. And it seems that parents tend to adapt better to this kind of loss when they have similar coping styles and can communicate openly and honestly with each other.
Absolutely. That mutual support and understanding within the couple is so crucial when navigating this shared grief. When they're on the same page, it strengthens their bond and helps them both heal.
It's about facing it together, even when it's incredibly painful. And our source also stressed the importance of helping parents work through those really difficult feelings. Fear about future pregnancies, the impact on their relationship, feelings of having failed as a parent, and then the guilt, both blaming themselves and sometimes blaming each other.
Those are such common and intense emotions after losing a child. It's crucial to address them head-on, provide a safe space for parents to process them, and help them navigate those incredibly complex emotional landscapes.
It's about acknowledging those feelings, not pushing them away. And on a related note, our source mentioned the importance of addressing any unfinished business before someone dies. Saying goodbye, expressing appreciation, even disappointment if it needs to be said.
Absolutely. That can make a huge difference in how someone grieves afterward. It's about preventing regrets, finding a sense of closure. Encouraging those conversations, as difficult as they can be, can really have a positive impact.
We even got some brief examples of grief scenarios, a father struggling a year after his teenage son died in a car accident, wanting to move on but feeling a strain with his still deeply grieving wife, and a 13-year-old brother feeling guilty because he feels relieved after his brother's death.
These just bring to life the diverse and complex tapestry of grief. Each person's journey is unique, and these scenarios show the different challenges and feelings that can emerge within a family after such a profound loss. There's no right or wrong way to grieve.
Right. And then there's complicated grief, where a full depressive episode can develop within about 3 months after the loss. Significant changes in appetite and sleep, social withdrawal, loss of interest in things, slowing down of movements and thoughts. And apparently, it's particularly common in teens and children reacting to the loss of a parent.
Complicated grief is when that grieving process becomes more intense and prolonged, interfering with daily life. And it can overlap with or develop into major depression. It's especially important to be aware of the signs in younger people who've lost a parent and make sure they get the support they need.
Okay. Shifting gears again, our sources highlighted that pregnancy can actually increase vulnerability to both anxiety and depression.
Yeah, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Those hormonal changes, physical changes, and emotional adjustments can make people more susceptible to mood disorders. So it's really important to be aware of that, both for expectant mothers and their healthcare providers.
It's about being proactive, having those conversations about mental well-being during pregnancy. And our sources mention that psychological conflicts related to maybe an unplanned pregnancy or one that happens at a difficult time can also be stressors. And then, of course, pregnancies that are complicated by physical or socioeconomic issues, or even traumatic events during pregnancy, like a death in the family, can further complicate things.
Absolutely. These can add layers of stress and complexity, making it harder to process grief or adapt to the changes of becoming a parent. And then there's maternity blues, that common experience of emotional ups and downs after childbirth. It's usually temporary, but it's important not to dismiss it entirely because it can sometimes be a sign of something more serious developing.
So it's like a bridge between those normal fluctuations and something like postpartum depression or psychosis.
Right. Early recognition is key in those situations.
We also got some really powerful glimpses into the lived experience of depression through personal accounts. One person described feeling totally drained after a relapse years after losing their husband. Another talked about feeling lonely and useless in their work, alongside a long history of depression that hadn't responded well to treatment.
These personal narratives are so important. They give us a real sense of what it's like to live with this condition, how it affects your energy, your self-worth, your whole life. And they show the real challenges people face in trying to find support that actually works.
Okay, let's move into attachment theory now. Our sources mention that while we know a lot about how attachment behaviors develop in kids from studying primates, we actually have less detailed information about this process in humans.
Yeah, it's interesting observing those attachment behaviors in other primates. The clinging, the seeking comfort and security gives us insights into the fundamental nature of those early bonds. And the fact that we have less detailed data in humans highlights an area where more research could be really beneficial.
It was fascinating to learn about those behaviors in primates. That close physical contact in early life, sleeping together, seeking out the mother when scared, and how those ties might loosen but still be there even into adolescence. And even the emergence of some differences in activity and social roles between males and females later on.
It really underscores the lasting influence of those early relationships on behavior and emotional security, even beyond our own species.
And of course, John Bowlby's work on attachment theory was central to this. His work on separation anxiety and mourning really changed our understanding of how important those early bonds are.
Absolutely. He highlighted how those early experiences shape our responses to separation and loss throughout our lives.
And the studies on how kids behave when reunited with their mothers after separation were striking. Some treated their mothers like strangers at first, and then there was often a period of intense clinging after that initial detachment. And the longer the separation, the more pronounced that detachment behavior seemed to be.
It really shows the impact separation can have on that developing attachment system. It's like a protective mechanism at first, that withdrawal, and then this increased need for closeness once the mother returns.
There's that powerful quote from William James: "The great source of terror in infancy is solitude." It speaks to that deep need for connection right from the start.
It really captures how essential those social bonds are for our well-being from the earliest stages of life. And even Sigmund Freud's views on anxiety related to separation from the mother evolved over time. He started to recognize the impact of external experiences like separation on the development of anxiety.
It seems like he came to appreciate the importance of those early relationships more and more.
It seems that way. And those studies on the baby rhesus monkeys separated from their mothers were really insightful. The initial protest, the crying and calling out, followed by a period of quiet and inactivity. And interestingly, fear wasn't shown as much when the monkeys weren't completely alone. So having a trusted adult nearby seems to make a big difference.
It's like that adult presence provides a buffer against the fear and distress.
Exactly. And we also got a list of those common fear-provoking situations in childhood. Loud noises, heights, strangers, unfamiliar objects, animals, pain. It seems pretty universal across cultures.
Makes sense. It's all about those perceived threats to safety and security. And finally, in the context of attachment, the idea of post-traumatic stress disorder of abandonment came up. Those common experiences in recovery. Shock, disorientation, numbness, and what's called the shattering stage. It really highlights the potential for deep and lasting emotional wounds from abandonment.
It shows that those experiences of abandonment, especially in close relationships, can have a profound and lasting impact, sometimes even leading to symptoms similar to PTSD.
Let's dive into some history now, some psychoanalytic perspectives. We learned about Hippocrates and his theory of the four humors. He linked melancholia, which is what we now call depression, to an excess of black bile.
It's fascinating to look back at these early attempts to understand mood disorders. It shows that connection between physical states, psychological experiences, and overall well-being was recognized even back then.
And those early treatments, using hormones, chemical messengers like adrenaline, in the early days of psychopharmacology, it's a far cry from what we have today.
Absolutely. It really shows how far we've come in our understanding of the biological underpinnings of mental illness. And our sources noted a big shift in psychiatric thinking over time, moving away from that anatomical view, looking for physical damage in the brain, toward a more neurobiological one, focusing on functional disturbances and emotions.
So it's not about finding a lesion or something, it's about how the brain is functioning.
Exactly. And that was a huge step forward. It meant mental illnesses could be understood as disruptions in brain function and neurochemistry, even if there were no visible structural abnormalities.
Okay. And then there's Freud's concept of ego feelings for emotions like depression and anxiety. The idea that they're only pathological, meaning signs of illness, when they reach a certain level of intensity or last too long.
It's a good reminder that sadness and anxiety are normal human emotions. It's the degree, the duration, and the impact on our lives that determine when they become a problem.
It's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
And there was a time of great optimism around psychiatric medications. They were seen as a way to restore the subject. But then there were concerns about the socialization of drugs and the potential disappearance of the subject.
It reflects a broader societal debate, which continues today, about the role of medication in mental health. Are we over-reliant on them? What's the impact on individual agency and subjective experience? It's a complex issue.
Absolutely. And starting in the 1960s in France, there was a growing interest among hospital psychiatrists in exploring psychotherapy and psychoanalysis alongside medication. So it's like those different approaches started to come together.
It was a turning point. There was a growing recognition that psychodynamic approaches could offer valuable insights, leading to a more integrated approach to treatment.
And it was mentioned that early on, general practitioners were often the ones prescribing antidepressants. And there were concerns about whether they had enough training in psychopharmacology and about the influence of the pharmaceutical industry.
That raises concerns about responsible prescribing and potential biases, which is still relevant today. We need to ensure that medication is used appropriately and effectively, especially in primary care settings.
And then there was the move toward community psychiatry and large-scale studies, like the ECA project. They wanted to gather data on how often mental illnesses recur in the general population. And those studies found that depression was on the rise.
Those studies were crucial in understanding the scope of the problem, the prevalence and course of mental disorders in communities. It informed public health initiatives and helped us understand the societal impact of these conditions.
And one key takeaway for our listeners is that despite all the research, there isn't one single biological marker that can definitively diagnose depression. It's not as simple as a chemical imbalance.
It really highlights the complexity of depression. It's a mix of biological, psychological, and social factors. There's no simple blood test or brain scan that can tell you for sure.
Right. It's about understanding the whole person. And our sources mention that non-psychotic depressive states tend to have a higher chance of relapse or becoming chronic. and defining recovery is tricky.
Absolutely. We need to think long-term when it comes to depression, recognizing that it can be an ongoing process for many people, and treatment plans should be individualized, taking into account the possibility of recurrence.
And from a psychoanalytic perspective, cure isn't just about feeling good. It's about integrating that experience of illness into your life story.
It's a different way of thinking about healing. It's about understanding the underlying conflicts that might be contributing to your distress and finding a way to incorporate those experiences into your sense of self, rather than just trying to erase them.
It's about making meaning from those experiences. And Freud's views on death anxiety were complex and even contradictory. There's still debate among psychoanalysts about how common it is and whether it's often disguised as other anxieties like fear of separation.
Freud's exploration of death anxiety was a journey, and it's still a topic that challenges us today. It's about trying to understand this deep, universal human concern.
And it's interesting that Freud himself had dreams about death, which kind of contradicts his own idea that death wasn't central to our unconscious.
The fascinating glimpse into his own inner world. It suggests that maybe death held a more significant place in his mind than he explicitly acknowledged. And then there's the concept of the death drive in psychoanalytic theory. It's not the same as fear of death, but it's another way of grappling with that idea.
It's a theoretical way to try to understand those big existential questions. And there's also the idea in psychoanalysis of turning death into a wish, those so-called death wishes. Maybe it's a way of making that scary topic feel more manageable.
It could be a defense mechanism, a way of deflecting from the anxiety-provoking realities of death and our own mortality. And our sources touched on the interplay between denial and acceptance, Freud's early ideas about sexual trauma and obsessional neurosis, and the concept of erotogenic masochism. It's a whirlwind tour of psychoanalytic theory.
It is. A lot to unpack there. But let's shift gears to those practical strategies and self-care tips. One big recommendation was getting organized and prioritizing tasks to avoid procrastination. They even mentioned the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule.
Time management and prioritizing are essential, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed, which is common with depression. The 80-20 rule reminds us to focus on the things that will have the most impact, and daily reviews were recommended as a way to stay on track and identify what's most important. Taking a few minutes each day to plan and assess can make a big difference.
It's about creating a roadmap, breaking things down into smaller steps. And our sources talked about self-discipline, but not in a harsh, self-denying way. It was more about persistence, discernment, fulfilling commitments, endurance, delaying gratification for long-term benefits.
It's a more positive and empowering way to think about self-discipline. It's about building resilience and working toward meaningful goals. And they also suggested replacing those unhelpful addictive behaviors with positive alternatives. But the key is to understand your own patterns and triggers first. What are you trying to escape or avoid? What needs are you trying to meet with those behaviors?
It's about finding healthier ways to cope. And regular exercise was highlighted, even just 20-30 minutes a few times a week. The key is consistency, not intensity.
Exercise is great for both physical and mental health. Find something you enjoy and can stick with, and you'll reap the benefits. And omega-3 fatty acids, found in fatty fish, were mentioned as being potentially helpful for mood.
So what we eat can actually affect how we feel.
Absolutely. And they suggested strategies for challenging those negative thoughts, those problematic life lenses, like doing a cost-benefit analysis. Ask yourself, is this belief serving me? What are the downsides of holding on to it?
It's about taking a step back and evaluating those ingrained patterns. And they talked about emotional reasoning, that tendency to treat your feelings as facts. It's a good reminder that our feelings are real, but they're based on our thoughts, which might not always be accurate.
It's so important to recognize when we're doing that, when we're letting our emotions dictate our reality. And one suggestion was to test out those negative predictions by taking small actions. It's a way to gather evidence that might challenge those beliefs.
It's like putting those thoughts on trial. And in relationships, approaching criticism with empathy and a focus on de-escalation can lead to much better communication. It's about trying to understand where the other person is coming from.
It can turn conflict into an opportunity for growth and connection. And creating a list of positive affirmations to counter those negative self-perceptions can be a really powerful way to boost self-esteem.
It's like creating your own personal pep talk. And they talked about the difference between healthy interdependence and unhealthy dependence in relationships. That true self-love is a more stable source of self-esteem than relying on others for validation.
It's about finding that balance between connection and maintaining your own sense of self. And sometimes, even in the heat of an argument, breaking the touch barrier can help maintain a sense of intimacy and connection.
That physical touch can be so reassuring even when you're disagreeing.
Absolutely. And using I statements instead of absolute statements can really improve communication.
Yeah.
It's about expressing your perspective without blaming or accusing, which can make the other person less defensive.
It's about owning your experience without putting the other person down. So we've covered a lot today. We've gone deep into the many layers of depression, from its progression to treatment approaches, the impact of loss and attachment, historical perspectives, and even practical self-care strategies.
And we've seen that it's a complex experience, showing up in many different ways. Understanding those nuances is crucial, both for your own self-awareness and for supporting others.
Exactly. And we hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, more informed perspective, whether you're dealing with depression yourself or want to better understand someone who is.
And as a final thought, consider this. Given that intricate dance between our inner world and the events that shape our lives, what's one small shift in perspective or one action you might explore this week based on what we've discussed today?
It's about taking even a small piece of what we've explored and seeing how it resonates with you. And we encourage you to keep exploring these important topics to think about what questions this has raised for you. Until next time.